Marv Modell. I was born January 15th, 1922. That makes me 90 years old. I feel pretty good for the 90. And in any event, when I was 20 years old in 1942, I was too young for the military draft, so I decided to join the Coast Guard, the United States Coast Guard, the one I had the most respect for some reason or other. And I was sworn in. I remember the date was October 12th of 42. And I went in for active duty on November 14th of 42 and was sent to boot camp. After we were sworn in, we went to boot camp in Manhattan Beach on the East Coast, and we were there for about 2 months. Among other things in our training, we did judo and boxing, and our boxing instructor was the former heavyweight champion of the world, Jack Dempsey. And I saw Jack, he said, "Call me Jack." I saw Jack every day during this training period. And one day I kind of annoyed him by joking about the importance of boxing in a shooting war, and he straightened me out. He called me a wise kid of 20, and I said, "Yes, I guess I am." So from then on, we were good friends. In any event, we shipped out from there, and we were told that we were going to go to Ireland to help the Navy establish a submarine base. In the meantime, they took us to, this was in New Jersey, they took us there to do a couple of months of port duty on the waterfront. We were charged with checking out all the ships that came in across the Atlantic, merchant marine ships, and many of them came in. They were completely covered in ice from the freezing weather that they sailed through. And I came in one day to check back to our station in Hoboken, New Jersey, and I was told to pack my sea bag. And I wasn't sure why, but I did pack it, and with 4 other men, they provided us with a transportation in an Army, I guess it was an Army truck, and took us into Lower Manhattan at 42 Broadway, which is the headquarters of United States Coast Guard Intelligence. And we found out that we were now in intelligence. I asked them, this was late in the evening, and I said, "Where do we sleep tonight?" And they says, "You'll have to find your own place. You're now on subsistence and quarters, S&Q, and you're getting the magnificent sum of $3.05 a day to live out." So that wasn't too bad. Actually, I got on the subway and went home to my parents, who lived in Brooklyn. I spent the next 3 plus years in Coast Guard Intelligence. Did some very interesting, sometimes not dangerous, but kind of not too easy on us. The things that we had to do, we had to go aboard ships to make sure that the people, the men or women, celebrities and so forth that wanted aboard military ships were clear that their background had no doubts about their activities, and so we fingerprinted people, and we did all the things that security people do. And then for a time I was sent out on the North Atlantic on what they called a seagoing tug. It was a buoy tender in the North Atlantic, that didn't last too long, and then I was put back into Coast Guard intelligence, and I was actually there until I was discharged with a good conduct medal, I might say. Incidentally, I was a Seaman first class on the day that I went into the Coast Guard, and 3 or 4 years later I left as a Seaman first class. So there wasn't much change there, but I was discharged honorably the first week in December of '45. My wife and I met my wife in January or February of 1943. Somebody suggested I go to one of the local USOs, and I did. I walked in, and there were these young women there handing out donuts and coffee to the sailors and soldiers and Marines and Coast Guard and Navy and Merchant Marine and so forth. And I was sitting there reading a magazine, and this beautiful young blonde walked by, and she looked at me and she said, "Do you mind if I sit down?" And I says, "No, why don't you? Please do." And as she sat down, this is not an exaggeration, I said to myself, I'm going to marry this girl. She was just 18 and I was 21. And a year later we did get married. Rena and I have been married now 68 years. From April 23rd, 44 until this day in August of 2012. And my wife, Rena, was a civilian employee of the 3rd Naval District on the East Coast. She was involved in the Navy's efforts dealing with, what was that called now? The petroleum pool.
And the war bond office.
And war bond office.
And all civilians that bought war bonds.
Yeah. She did very well with them, and they loved her very much in the Navy there. And we had 2 beautiful children. Unfortunately, our son Joel died at the age of 27 of acute myeloid leukemia. That was in 1972. And our daughter Jane today lives in England with her family. But we've had a good life. We made the best of the rough times. And let me just say this now. I was fortunate enough to make the friendship of 4-star Admiral Robert J. Papp, who happens to be the United States Coast Guard's Commandant today. He was sworn in and appointed by the President last year in 2011. And he and I became friends. He, the 4-star Admiral, and me, the Seaman First Class. And I was very proud to have him provide me with a short speech regarding his feelings about the Coast Guard, the greatest generation, as it's called sometimes, that was celebrating the Coast Guard's 222nd birthday just about 10 days ago on the 4th of August. And I read his congratulations to everybody and his good wishes and the veterans that were there. The spars that I saw from the Coast Guard were so happy that the Admiral, the Commandant, gave us his support, unstinting report. He is a great man. He is highly regarded, Commandant Papp, the Admiral, and I have the greatest respect for him. And I don't know if there's anything else I can add to this.
Marv, can you tell us of any other experiences that you've had while you were serving the Coast Guard?
Yes, in sometime in 1943, a subject came up about the ship Normandy. It's all over the internet, the historical occurrence that happened to the Normandy, which was second only to the Queen Mary in size. And when the war broke out, Pearl Harbor, on December 7th, the American government took possession of the British ship Normandy, which happened to be parked at a pier in New York City at that time, and became then automatically the property of the American government. The Normandy was used to send thousands of GIs from the East Coast to England and to France for the invasion. It was a very valuable property. And unfortunately one day, notice came through that there was a gigantic fire on the Normandy. It was parked, or it was stationed at one of the piers on the west side of I believe it was the Hudson River, or it might have been the East River in New York. And the fire department and the police and the FBI all rushed down, the Coast Guard and the Navy and so forth, and they could not stem or stop the flames, and they filled the Normandy with so much water that it became overloaded, and it turned over on its side. And it laid there on its side for the rest of the war. It was of no use to the government. They couldn't get it back to its original condition. And the official story then in 1942, when this happened, I believe it was 41 or 42, was that a welder's torch, a spark from a welder's torch, started the flames on the Normandy, and that's what caused its demise. The people that I knew in Coast Guard intelligence told me a whole other story. They told me that when they got to the Normandy that day, the first thing they did, our sailors, was to rush to the emergency hoses to help kill the flames. And every hose that they found on the Normandy was slashed and cut, was macheted and put out of complete, no ability to do anything but just lay there, pieces of rubber that were not usable. And I immediately said that this had to be German sabotage. This did not occur from an accidental spark, as the official notice proclaimed. So that was one thing I remember. Another thing was, I was on a 48-hour liberty doing guard duty, and I was in Manhattan in New York, and this was in February of 43, and I was walking through about 11 o'clock at night looking for a cab someplace to get me to where I wanted to go, and I was in the theatrical district, and I noticed that all the theaters were pretty well shut down. The theaters were over, the shows were over, and the audiences left. And there was one light that I noticed in one of the theaters, in the lobby of this theater, beautiful theater, that was just dimly lit. And I saw a woman standing there all by herself. I didn't know who she was or what she was doing, so I was in uniform, and I went up to the front window, and I looked through the window, and I was shocked to see that I was looking at the President, Franklin D. Roosevelt's wife, Eleanor Roosevelt. At that time, the most powerful and the most well-known woman, female, in the whole world. So I wasn't about to let this opportunity go by. I opened the front door, which was open, and I walked toward her, and she saw me walking toward her, and I got about within 10 or 15 feet of her. Two men came from behind the drapes in the lobby. They subsequently, I found out they were from the Secret Service. They were watching her. And they both tackled me down to the ground. And she, in a very loud voice, said, "Leave that Coast Guard alone, he just wants to talk." She knew she was right. And in 5 seconds, the two Secret Service guys completely disappeared. And I stood there with the president's wife, the commander-in-chief's wife. He was in his third term at this time. And she and I talked for about 10 minutes, 11 minutes. And before I left, I said to her, Mrs. Roosevelt, I have to tell you, I have the greatest respect for the president, of course. He's my boss. I says, but I really wish you and he could change places, because I think you'd make one hell of a president. And she let out a laugh that could have been heard 3 blocks away. It was so funny to her. And I guess I was pretty nervy to say that. And she looked at me and she says, Marv, she said, she put a hand on my shoulder, my right shoulder, and she says, thank you for stopping by and saying what you said. And that was something that I guess I'll never ever forget. She was a great lady, and I was privileged to meet her just for a short time. And my wife...
What did your wife do? Can you tell me what you did while you were, basically you were a civilian, but you were still serving the war time?
Yes. First thing that I did was gimbals. I had just gotten a job there. Department store. And they gave me a tray to walk around the store and sell these little bouquets of war stamps. And I sold so many, Mr. Gimbel had to come down and see who was selling so many.
Get to the Navy.
And
That's okay.
Get to the Navy about it. Not
Okay.
Gimbals.
thing I did for the war. And then I got a job at the 3rd Naval District. And what I did was, at the beginning, was to work in the war bond office, where all the civilians who wanted war bonds were served. And then I was promoted to work with the petroleum pool, which was a hush-hush job. And I don't know if you want this in that, you can take it out. I became pregnant, and they didn't want to see a pregnant woman there. So they found another job for me, and I was the receptionist for all the men who had to have, in the office, who had to have their papers typed up. And I thought that was quite a joke, as you can see.
I think
an exciting time.
Yeah.
I think people would like to know, especially the newer generation, what are war bonds?
The war bonds and the war stamps was money that people bought to run the war.
I can say it.
To
They sold stamps for 5 cents and 10 cents and 25 cents. They were called war bonds and war stamps, and it was to encourage the millions of people in the United States as civilians to support the war effort. And people used to go out to the local post office and buy these stamps and save them, and that was what the war bond and the war stamps were all about.
What was the war bond used for, besides supporting the war? Was it used for anything
Well,
else?
the war bonds were, you got your money back eventually from buying them, but it was to, I guess the main reason that they sold those things, or one of the reasons was, that the general public should feel that they have a role to play in this war that was a war of all wars. No war before, since, or after has ever had the magnitude and the size and the importance that World War II had. At least that's what the experts say, and I believe that they're right. And in this way, unlike today, almost all people, all civilians, people on farms, people at work day to day, older people, people in institutions, whatever it was, all felt that they had a responsibility to support the government. And one way they could do it was that if they were unable to join any of the military, was to buy a war bond or the stamps. And that was their contribution. And it was a healthy thing to do, and it kind of brought the whole country together, backing all the efforts that were on the shoulders of the sailors, the Marines, the men and women in the factories and so forth, that were keeping the government going and making life bearable for the people that were left behind at home. So that's what the War Bonds and War Stamps program was.
And you said that you became pregnant while you were serving the government. Was your children born overseas, or were they born here in the States, or?
No, I was pregnant with our son, and he was born here.
In the Marine Hospital on Staten Island, New York. Right?
That's right.
Okay.
Did they give you, I know that today there's a lot given to military wives for help while their military is serving. Did you find that you had a lot of help from the government as a military wife?
No, because I had a very bad experience there. They tried something new on me, and it didn't work for 5 reasons that it should have worked. So I never went back there. But it was an interesting experience for me, because I had to go through a room, and there was a young man who was sitting in a basket, I thought. And I think this has to be said, because people forget about the young men that fight the war for us. He had no arms and he had no legs. And I went over to him and said hello, and how are you doing today? And he thanked me. There were tears in his eyes. He says, nobody comes over to talk to me.
Paraplegic.
Paraplegic.
Yeah.
Right. I know that there's a lot of veterans that have come back from serving our country, and they have come back not the way they went. And do you find that, or do you feel that our government is giving them the support that they should have? Or if not, how can they give our veterans more support? What would your suggestion be? If you could have a suggestion to the highest ranking officer, how would they help our veterans and all branches?
I think as far as what's happening today, Afghanistan and the other areas in which there's military action and so forth, I think too often the sentiments that you hear from the politicians or the spokespeople is more just words and rhetoric, and sometimes there has to be a little more action. I think that what the GIs are doing today, and those that are returning, especially the ones that are suffering from wounds and mental and other results, the difficulties that they've experienced in Afghanistan and Iraq and so forth, I think they should get absolutely the very best of medical care. I don't think there should be months, weeks and months, and maybe years delay until they get their proper attention and so forth from the facilities and from the Veterans Administration and from the Veterans Hospitals. I think that they deserve a #1 priority, and that money should never, ever be a question of the government when it comes to the fighting men and women, those that have gone overseas, those that are here to back them up and so forth. And there are too many sad stories in today's papers that the veterans very often are given short shrift. They're not taken seriously enough by many of the authorities, yet there are some that get excellent care. But it should be excellent care and immediate care for all men and women in uniform, and those that have suffered from the wars in the past years,
And
going back as far back as we have to go.
And what would your suggestion be on a female side?
On a female side, and as a mother, I feel war does nothing good. And I think that everything has to be done to not to avoid a war, because we have lost too many generations of our young people, and that to me is not allowable.
Good. That's not
It's
acceptable.
not acceptable. It's not right. And the mothers and the wives can back me out 100%.
Now, you've heard of the Blue Star Moms.
Yes.
Back in World War II, there wasn't such an organization, was there? Or was there anything like the Blue Star Moms?
I don't recall. I just know at my youngest years I signed petitions against war.
Did you have other military wives that you got together to support each other emotionally? And
No, I never got involved with that because I had our son so unexpectedly, and he was a gift because I did everything that you should do, but it wasn't supposed to be. I wasn't built that way. I became quicker with it than without it.
can you tell me, did anybody in your family serve in the military?
I can tell you that. Well,
Each of you, I'd like to each of you tell me.
I have had uncles that were in World War I, came back, one of them was gassed, mustard gassed. My brother was in the Signal Corps of the United States Army, and he served in the Galapagos Islands in the South Pacific, where Darwin wrote his first literary contributions about how the world began and so forth. So my brother was there. I have a cousin who was in the Air Force. I have another cousin was a pilot in Europe. Oh, and my favorite cousin, his name was Norman Seiler. He was at Pearl Harbor on the day that it was bombed by the Japanese on December 7th. He was at Hickam Field, I believe it was called. And he told me that the night before Pearl Harbor, that would make it December 6th, there were thousands or hundreds in Pearl Harbor of household parties that invited sailors and soldiers stationed in Pearl Harbor to come. I don't know, it would be, I guess it was a Saturday night. I think Pearl Harbor, December 7th, was a Sunday, wasn't it not, Raina? Well, the night before, my cousin told me that he and all his buddies went to these homes of mostly Japanese wealthy people in Pearl Harbor, and there was plenty of food and plenty of drink. And everybody drank an awful lot. And Sunday morning when the planes came over, this is what my cousin Norman told me. He said most of us were still dealing with very, very bad hangovers from all the drinking that was done the night before. And he said to me, I think that was all planned to get us all drunk and ineffectual when we might have been needed most the next day. In any event, he was at Pearl Harbor, and then he was sent to Europe, and he did 3 years of duty there. So
What about your family? Did you have any brothers or sisters or
Father was in it.
your father?
I'm just reminding you.
Okay. Your father.
My father was in it,
World War I.
World War I, and they dismissed him from duty one day too short to get a pension.
Mm.
And he was never angry about it. He just, when he was dismissed, the war was still on, the second war. He was one of the ones that made sure you covered your windows and he did his duty that way. But I don't know about my cousins.
Let me just say about her father. Of course, World War I was 1 year, from 1917 to 1918. And the rule then was you had to be in the United States Army for 90 days or more if you ever wanted any kind of hospitalization or any claims as a veteran. 90 days. My father-in-law, her father, was discharged on the 89th day, along with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds or thousands of other soldiers. They did that, and he was eliminated from asking for any compensation, and he did have some, he lost the hearing in one ear, I believe, from the loud cannon that were close by.
So
But because he was discharged on the 89th day and not the 90th, he never could get any help from the VA. This is a true story. If anybody wants to check me on it, I'll give you his name and number and his picture and everything.
Yes.
It was a bad thing that the government did then. And let me just say one other thing about war. As much as the thing I like most about the United States Coast Guard is that it never was a killing machine like the others. The Coast Guard, their job has been for 222 years to take care of the civilian, take care of people in need, to take care of the people who are hurt and sick and so forth. And their primary was not to do killing like, of necessity, the Marines, the Navy, or the Army. And the one thing I want to say about the military and my feelings about war is let's never, ever glorify war. It's an evil. Sometimes they say it was necessary in World War II, and maybe so because of what was happening in the world. But let us never, ever glorify war for the sake of glorifying it. It's nothing to be proud about. It's nothing that one has to feel so good and happy about that we had a war. Sometimes it's a terrible necessary evil, but let's never glorify it.
What they did to the Japanese people who were citizens here was a terrible thing that the United States did. Put them in camps where they had no food, where they had no shelter that was right, and a lot of them died there. My daughter's best friend thought everyone grew up that way. And that was a terrible thing they did to people, but people we knew had little shops and little restaurants in Brooklyn, New York. They put them in the camps.
Okay.
They did nothing. They were innocent.
Right.
And I have to say again, if you can't settle the differences with speaking like caring and intelligent human beings, then you shouldn't be in the position you're in to start with.
Did you, Marv, was there anybody in your life that steered you to the Coast Guard versus any other branch of service?
No.
Or why did you choose the Coast Guard over?
Because I remember as a kid, I was an avid reader. I was in the library every week. It's kids at my age, before the era of television, we read newspapers every day. We knew what was happening in the world. We went to libraries and we read books, things I don't think too many young people are doing today. They're not exposed to anything more than maybe 30 seconds on CNN, and that's their only understanding of what the world is about. But I remember reading at one time when the Coast Guard was first brought about in the year 1790 by the Revolutionary Fathers, the Americans that decided to organize the first military corps in this country. It was the United States Coast Guard. And the Coast Guard, the things that they did in those early days with those early ships that when they plowed the seas, I felt this kind of pride about them. And so when I grew up, until I was about 19 to 20, I always had an empathetic or a sympathy or an interest in this thing called the Coast Guard. I had no knowledge of what it was about or anything. And so one day I said to my folks, I says, look, they're not drafting me, I'm too young, I'm going to get down and talk to the people at the Coast Guard. And eventually they accepted me, and I've never regretted it since. I think it's the greatest of all the military, so-called military organizations of this country. I think they have much. They did it in Katrina. They were helpful. Every day you can't pick up a newspaper and not find that somebody's not being rescued by the Coast Guard. They're a great and glorious and wonderful organization, and I'm proud to know Admiral Pat, the Commandant, because he's a great and, I think, an extremely capable and well thought of individual.
If you had a choice and you were starting and you were 20 today and you were 18, just getting married, and there is a war going on, would you join the Coast Guard today and serve?
If I had to do it again, oh sure, I sure would. I mean, maybe the only thing I would not have done was get married then. Wait until the thing was over. But, oh yes, I think what I've said in the last 20 or 30 minutes is obvious. If there has to be a war, if there has to be a military action, if it's necessary for citizens to participate in the defense of this country, my first, second, and third choices would all be Coast Guard.
So you would even recommend our young people, if they were looking into joining the military, to definitely look into the Coast Guard.
To give the Coast Guard a real good look and a think and to research it, and you may come out feeling exactly as I do. I won't tell them what to do because one doesn't know what somebody else should be doing, but that's the way I feel very strongly about it. And I'm just sorry that there are not too many of us left around these days from World War II in the Coast Guard. It's just a tiny fraction of the whole military, but it's, to me, the best there is.
So you're almost like a Coast Guard bride then.
Yes, but the funny thing is, I always say I was waiting till I was 18, because you had to be 18 to join the SPAs.
What is the SPAs?
The Women's Coast Guard.
Women sailors.
Women sailors.
Yeah, in the Coast Guard.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. The Navy has...
And I think I was 1 week or a couple of weeks too shy of it when I met him.
Everybody must know this. If they don't, I'm going to remind everybody.
Yes, do that.
The Army women were called WAC, W-A-C, Women's Army Corps, I believe it is. The Navy, they were called Waves. The Coast Guard, they were called Spars. The Marines, I think, were called Marines. I'm not sure about the Air Force or any of the others, but the Spars in the Coast Guard were fine women doing a very important job, and I was privileged to know many of them, and there were dozens of them in intelligence, the section that I was part and parcel of.
Also, I'll have you both answer this. You talked about the USO, where you both met. Tell the audience what the USO is, because there's a lot of young people out there today that have no idea what the USO is.
USO is United Service Organizations. It is an organization that is composed of volunteers who receive money and financial backing from the general public. It's not a governmental agency. And they set up places all over this country, all over the world, for American men and women in uniform, when they have a break in whatever they're doing, to come to the USO It might be a place they can dance, they can meet people, they can have a meal, they can have somebody to talk to. It's a socialization, as far as I can remember. Back in World War II, there were so many of the USOs. Maybe the most publicized one was the Stage Door Canteen in New York, where all the mucky mucks and the big Hollywood stars would get there and dance with the sailors and the soldiers and so forth. And I was suggested by somebody, why don't you go to this local on the East Coast? And I went in, and my wife was there, and she was doing her job with the other beautiful women, and it was a converted private home that was given to the USO, and I was sitting up on the second floor reading my Esquire magazine,
Okay.
and my wife walked by, and as I explained earlier, the rest is history.
Did your family have any feelings of you working with the USO?
My family knew that I loved to dance, and I went any place where there was dancing. And I was an art student at that time. I had gotten an entrance into Cooper Union Art and Engineering, and I was going to school, and I needed to go dancing. And my cousins would look out for that. And then I read about saw something about I was working in Gibbons, and the woman wanted me to meet her brother. So she told me to go to this. And this USO looked like a small version of Gone with the Wind. It had this big staircase. It was a magnificent place. And I took art in my lower, I always had an art class. So I did arts and crafts with the men. And there were a lot of men who wanted to learn how to draw. And I did that on Saturdays for them in the afternoon. And then I was the hostess at night. And we just didn't give, my husband is fond of saying donuts and coffee. But we did a lot more than that. We heard stories, and the men had to have someone to talk to. They didn't have their sisters, they didn't have their girlfriends or boyfriends, and they needed people. So the woman that I had worked with wanted me to see her brother, but I met somebody else.
Well, it looks like that was a good fit,
Yeah.
because you folks have been married for 68 years, and that's a long time, and you've endured a lot of changes in not just your own lives, but the lives of the Coast Guard, the United States government, and society. Back then, society has changed so much, you would almost recognize it from when you were growing up.
Just say something about the day that the war was over, August 14th in 1945. There was so much going on in this country. Again, I happened to be working in New York. I was working with naval intelligence people at 17 Battery Park. And the day that the war was over, hundreds of thousands of people were in the street, so happy and holding up newspapers. They surrendered, the war is over. And I was down there, and I was in uniform, and I was walking down the street, and on every 2 or 3 blocks there were bonfires, and they made these bonfires out of, they had these big garbage cans, and they put papers in them, and somebody would throw a match and so forth. And I got to the corner, and there were about 200 or 300 men and women there, so happy that the war was over. And as I got there, 2 young women came up to me, and I had my white cap on, and they took it, and one of them threw it up in the air, and it went right into the bonfire. And she says, "You'll never need that hat anymore, the war is over." And I couldn't care less about the hat. And I was happy that the war was over, and so was everybody. And that was my experience. Incidentally, it was about 3 blocks away from where that famous nurse was that was kissed by the sailor. I think her name was Edith Shane. She died a couple of years ago. And I was about 3 blocks away when she was kissed by, and I met Edith Shane at one of our generation weekly things, and I told her, I says, you know, Edith, I said, I was only about 3 blocks away from you when you were kissed by that sailor. I says, and if he didn't kiss you, I says, I might have. So she says to me, well, do it now. And I took her around and I gave her a big kiss, and that was it. That was right here at History Park in San Jose. And this was about a year or 2 before she died. That was the famous, most publicized picture, I think, of World War II, was that Navy guy kissing that nurse. And I gave her the kiss about 60 years later.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's very interesting. I said, but I volunteered to be and I have a history of volunteering and this, that, and the other thing. And
What kind of volunteers have you done in your lifetime? Approximately.
I would have to have my memory book in front of me.
Anything locally?
Locally, that became nationally, I volunteered at the Council on Aging in Santa Clara County, and I became
Janet Gray Hayes.
I didn't volunteer. She asked me to be her.
Tell her who you're talking about.
Janet Gray Hayes was the first mayor of a large city here.
First lady mayor
Well,
of San Jose.
Janet, I can say it, please.
Okay, sorry.
I was her advisor on aging because I had been at the Council on Aging, and she said to me that I was the best aide she ever had, and she was trying to get money to make it a permanent position, but she never did do that. But I volunteered in so many different things. I have those plaques. I didn't volunteer for the plaques. I volunteered because my grandmother had said to me, it's not what you can do for yourself, it's what you can do for others.
And that's probably something that most young people don't hear today.
Well, my grandmother was a very wise woman, and I learned a lot from her aside from cooking. But I did volunteer, and I have plaques galore, but I didn't want to do it for that. And I became a woman of achievement and this and that. And when I heard about a story about the Older Women's League, I was at De Anza campus, and there was a woman there who was trying to start a national organization for older women, Trish Summers. And I got to know her, and I helped start the Women's Center at the De Anza campus, and I was very active in the older adults office. So I became the unpaid assistant. And I did a lot of work and became known, and I met a lot of the politicians that came to talk to us. And my volunteerism went on and on and on, and I got plaques for it. And the other day I got a letter saying, Rena Modell or current occupant, like, are you still alive? So I called them up, and the one that you see over there was the people from that wanted to know what I was doing, and could I come to the dinner.
There's something that my wife didn't mention, but the San Jose Mercury News, about 15 years ago, there's a plaque there on the wall. She was awarded the Volunteer of the Year for San Jose, Rena Modell. Am I right?
Yeah, I was one of 5 women that got it that year.
But you were the one for the volunteer, and
Yeah,
the others were for
yeah,
other categories.
Yes.
So
And I helped start the first free unit for the county for breast cancer. And I got very active in that, and I had become active in politics at that time. So I taught them that politics is very important for young organizations. That's how you get the money, that's how you get the recognition. And I taught them all about politics and how to kick butt.
And Marv,
Yeah.
where did your name come from? And it's an unusual, your first name's an unusual.
Marvin.
Marvin.
Modell, Modell.
And what's the origin of your last name? Is it
I don't know. We're a 4th generation Americans. My mother and father were born in the United States, and so it's my mother. We're a generation, and our daughter is a generation. Our granddaughter is another generation back, and
Our great-grandson is another generation.
And where did your family come from?
Originally, my mother's family came from Poland, and my father's family was here. He had an older sister who told him, "There's the door, go," when he was 13, and he brought himself up. He had no mother. The mother had died, and the sister wasn't about to take care of him. And when she died and left him all her worldly goods, and she had a lot of worldly goods, he didn't want any part of it, poor thing. But my mother's family came from the first city that the Jews were picked up. The Jewish people were picked up and sent to camps. But they had left years before because the family, cousins had said, "You better come. Things are happening, terrible things are happening here."
And Marv,
yeah.
on some of your travels while you were serving the Coast Guard, where all did you go? What countries have you seen?
Well, all through the UK. Our daughter lives in England, and you mean my whole life?
Well, while you were serving in the military.
Very little at all. I was in the North Atlantic and never served. There was the things that we had to do was to protect the good and welfare of our personnel here in the States and the people that wanted to board their ships and so forth, and we were in charge of all activities of the merchant marine and make sure that they were clean and that their credentials were legitimate, and those that weren't were pulled out and weren't permitted for any mischief of any kind.
Have you done any traveling, you and your wife?
No. Mostly in the UK. In the British, we loved Ireland and Wales and Scotland and England, but that's it.
So you have done some traveling then?
Yeah, I'd love to do more. I'd love to have done more. I would love to go to the parts of Europe, and for some reason I'd like to go to Sweden and Norway and places like that, and Holland, France, and so forth.
Is there any experience while you were serving the Coast Guard that's maybe not serious, but was kind of funny?
I don't. Yeah. Well, I may have mentioned this to you once. I once had a situation when I was doing this guard duty in New Jersey on Hoboken, in Jersey City. And I carried a 38 Smith & Wesson in my holster, and I was doing pier guard duty. And every ship that tied up to that pier was my responsibility. And one time I was there, and it was from 12 midnight till 6 in the morning. That was my duty. And there were ships tied up there, and there were men working on these ships, painting and chipping and cleaning up and so forth for the next convoy that was going out. And a couple of men came to see me, and they said, "Hey, Coast Guard, we can't work on our ship because there's a guy there that's either drunk or what, he won't let us do it. He just stays put there, and he won't permit us to do any welding and any of the work that we have to do." So I was in full uniform, and I had this heavy coat on with the mouton collar and my watch cap and everything, and the gun in my holster, and I went up there, and this guy was about 6'3", and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and I says, "Would you please let these men work and do what they're supposed to be doing before the vessel is approved to leave?" He says, "No, I don't want them to do it." And he looked at me and he said, "Why do I have to do it? Who do you think you are, Coast Guard?" And I saw that this was going to be kind of a touch-and-go situation, and maybe a little bit nasty. And I said to him, I said, "Look, I have the authority for this pier, and this ship has to be overhauled. The work has to be done, and you're standing in their way." And he looked at me, and he looked at my gun, and he says, "You think I give a damn about your gun? You think I'm afraid of you? Get the hell off here." This is what he said. I'll watch my language. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I wasn't going to challenge this guy because he would have killed me. He was twice my size. And I looked at him, and for those old-timers that might be hearing this, there was an actor in Hollywood called Victor McLaglen. He was 10 times the man that what's his name? John
Wayne.
Who?
Wayne.
John Wayne. He was tougher than John Wayne, Victor McLaglen. And he had a certain signature in the way he acted and the way he handled difficult situations. And I said to myself, do a Victor McLaglen to this guy. And I looked at this fellow and I said, "Look, I want you to get off this ship and leave these men alone and let them do their work." And then I did a Victor McLaglen. I took my hand and I went right to my Smith & Wesson 38, which I never would have pulled out of the holster. And I says, "If you don't, I'm going to blow your brains out." Only I used a few 4-letter words. And he looked at me, and he looked at the gun, and he started to laugh, and he puts his arm around my shoulder, and he says, "Come on, forget about it." And he takes me into the galley, and we sit at a table, and on the table, everything was nailed down because when the ship is out sailing, they can't have plates and glasses and cups falling off. And he reaches under the table and he pulls out a bottle of Black Label. Scotch, I guess it is, isn't it? Or no, it's not. It's just booze. And he plunks it down on the table, takes out 2 cups, fills them up to the top. He hands me 1 cup full of Black Label. He takes the other, and in one swallow it goes down, and in about 20 seconds his head was laying down there and he was snoring. And I got up, didn't drink the stuff, and I ran off that ship and never went back. And I said to the guys, Go do what you have to do. That was maybe my most dangerous time in the 3 or 4 years I was on the Coast Guard. This guy was threatening me to beat the hell out of me. And he could have too if I allowed him to.
Have you met, you mentioned that you'd met the Roosevelts. Have you met any other presidents in your lifetime?
Yes,
Because of the
I
Coast Guard.
met the guy that ran against Franklin D. Roosevelt for his third term. His name was Wendell Willkie. I met him about 2 years after I got out. I was working for a newspaper then, the New York Post. I was training as a reporter and a city room copy boy, they called him then. And they had a special thing one day, and walked in was Wendell Willkie, who was a very good politician. He couldn't have beat Roosevelt in his third term, but nobody could. And I was talking with him, and I asked him if he needed a taxi, if he's going. He says, "Thank you, son." He was about 6'4", and he looked like an Oklahoma judge. And he said in his deep voice, my car is coming for me, but I appreciate what you're saying. And then he was, I think, a Midwesterner. And that was something I can't forget. Wendell Willkie, Eleanor Roosevelt, and somebody that I knew too personally who died only about a month ago was Gore Vidal, the famous writer. I knew Gore Vidal. He invited me to see him at his home in Hollywood, California, but I could never leave my wife because she wasn't feeling up to it, and I turned down Gore Vidal. And that's it. Oh, when I was in the Coast Guard, I may have mentioned this before, and we were in Hoboken. We were stationed in a YMCA there that the Coast Guard had taken over. We were directly across the street from Frank Sinatra's family. They lived right across the street from that, and I think I saw his mother once. But that's the end of my fame. That's it.
You mentioned you met Eleanor Roosevelt. Did you ever meet the president?
No. No. Who? The commander-in-chief?
The commander-in-chief.
He was running wars all over. Never met. If I met him, I would have met Churchill. But I never met them. No. I never met them. I was only a seaman first class, nothing much to get excited over. But with her, it was strictly a complete unexpected accident. And if I hadn't walked through the front door, or had the guts to do it, because you have to have guts to do when you see the president's wife, I never would have met her. But that's it. That's it. That's it.
Have you found that your life has changed for the better, because you did serve our country?
Yes. Oh, yes. It had a long-range effect on me. It had to. Anybody that goes in the uniform is a changed person, for the good or for the bad. For some people, it could be a very negative, something that you inherit that stays for the rest of your life, that you're not crazy about, you're not happy about. But with the Coast Guard, they were decent to me. I felt I was decent to them. Frankly, I was never really in any danger. I can always be grateful for that. It was accidental. If they didn't take me to go down to Coast Guard Intelligence, I would have gone to England, to Ireland, and from there maybe to France or wherever, and I don't know if I'd have been around today. But I was lucky, and I always felt that they gave me more than I gave them. And I was always grateful for that. And I met some very good friends. I had officers and other GIs that I knew in the course of all those years. I met people in the course of my work, others, celebrities. I remember one day I had to interview Marlene Dietrich, I think it was, the famous actress. She needed to get a pass to get on one of our ships to do one of her shows or something. And I met people like that, always meeting people like that. But I have good feelings and good memories, and especially now that I'm on kind of a friendship level with the commandant. You can't go higher than that. I don't know of any seaman first class that can brag about the fact that they were shipmates of the commandant, but my guts and nerve took me to that position, and I'm very happy for it, and it's been good for me, and it's been, especially at this time of my life, it's given me like a new lease on another career. My Coast Guard career is back after being dormant for 50, 60 years.
He has a knack of writing the most beautiful letters you have ever read. And he catches the people by their gut and their heart. It does.
Have you, do you meet with other veterans for anything special? Like,
No, I tried that. I tried joining the, I did join about a year or two ago the American Legion for some reason or not. The first time I ever did it, and I didn't feel there was anything there for me, and I dropped out. I'm not a joiner for things like that.
well, I do know that there are veterans that do get together for breakfasts and what have you, and I didn't know.
No, I don't have any. I know veterans that live here in this place where we live here, the Army and so forth. We're friendly and we talk to them, but I never made a point of doing that. I might point out something else from a personal standpoint. My closest cousin is the name Arthur Modell. Arthur Modell was the owner of the Baltimore Ravens National Football League team. And my cousin won the 2000 Super Bowl. And he's a Super Bowl hero of mine. I talk to him every week. He's a little younger than me. He owned the Cleveland Browns for 35 years, and then he sold the Browns, and he brought football back to Baltimore, Maryland, and started the Baltimore Ravens. And about 7 years after he got there, they won the Super Bowl, his one and only Super Bowl in 40 years. He was the only team owner in National Football League history that was the president of the NFL. So Art and me were first cousins. His father and my father were brothers. And I talk to him every week. I call him in Maryland. He's retired. He's not in good health. He's a good guy. I love him as a cousin, as a person, and I'm proud to know him. I know people that are thrilled to tell me they have his autograph. And one day I said to somebody, "You have his autograph?" I says, "I've got his blood. We're first cousins. We couldn't be closer." Oh, and incidentally, my grandmother, who was born in Hungary, was a first cousin to Joseph Pulitzer, the Pulitzer Prize people. She came from the same village. She was a first cousin. That means that I've got Joseph Pulitzer's blood in me somewhere. Big deal, but just thought I'd mention that.
Show me.
Have you found that your life might have been different if you hadn't joined the Coast Guard? Did you have any interest?
Yes. If I hadn't joined the Coast Guard, I'd been drafted. In 1942, 43, they were drafting people in this country. Like, they didn't ask any questions. You went right into the Army. I don't know what would have happened to me in the Army. I would have gone maybe right over on the invasion, or to Germany, or to Australia or something. Anything might have happened to me.
Were they drafting women back then?
No, they never drafted women. The Spars were all volunteers, and the Waves too. They never drafted women. They drafted men. I was, at the age of 20, they still didn't give me a number. In fact, I was never asked to go to a draft board. You're supposed to register and then wait for your number to come up, and then they tell you where to report. And so I was home, and all my friends, most of my friends, had enlisted and gone off in World War II. And I came home one day and I told my mother and father, and she got hysterical. I says, "I'm going to join." I said, "I don't want to stay here alone." I said, "I want to do my part for the country." "No, you can wait. You can wait." It's a good thing I didn't. So I decided, and I went down to the Coast Guard headquarters, and I spoke to them. First, they wouldn't take me. I was too young, and they didn't need me. Second time I went down, they took me. And I have all the papers to show. They told me to come down and swear and put my hand over my... And I do, and I'm now a Coast Guard. Now wait 1 month, and they sent me another letter and says, get your ass down here, you're in it, and you're going. And I did, and I was pleased about it.
What are the beginning rankings of a Coast Guard? Like, let's say somebody wanted to become in the Coast Guard. You said you were
an apprentice seaman. You go to boot camp. I came out of apprentice seaman has one little white stripe on your blue uniform, or on a white uniform, one little stripe, if I remember, was an apprentice seaman. And then after you did 30 or 60 days, they gave you another tiny little stripe on your wrist. You were a seaman first class. And I was a seaman first class for 4 years. I never asked to go ahead. They wanted me to, when the war was over, I think I was offered undoubtedly, if I re-signed and stayed in the Coast Guard. That's when I had my wife Rena, and we had our son Joel. I wasn't about to stay in it, but they offered me a chief's petty officers if I renewed. And I said, thanks, but no thanks. So you're an apprentice seaman, unless it's all changed today, I don't know. Seaman first class, and then the next would be, I guess, a third class yeoman, or whatever the ranks were, second, first, and then chief petty officer, and then warrant officer, and then my commanding officer when I first went into Coast Guard Intelligence was a 2.5 striper, Lieutenant Commander Scheffler. Good guy. And next would be commander, and then would be captain, not sure. And it goes all the way up to admiral. Renews, and the League of Friends of the Santa Clara County Commission. She was the 1981 Woman of Achievement volunteer for the whole Coast Guard here. February of 43.
That is a picture of you and
Rena.
Arena. Was this an engagement picture or a wedding
No, this
picture?
is when we met at the USO.
Oh, okay.
Way before engagements and weddings.
Warren, do you know what? As an art student at all the schools I ever went to, this was one of my finals. And the last picture of the term, and this was the professor who was the head of the class said he saved this for the last because there's nothing I can say to make it better. And one of our nieces, our favorite niece, says she wants that.
Go ahead. What is this picture of, Marv?
This is Coast Guard Intelligence in New York City, 1943. This was, I guess it was, they got us all together. It was like a picnic of some kind. And these were all the spars. This fellow here is my commanding officer, Scheffler. That's me with the little pink ink over me. And that's one of the best pictures I've ever seen of the spars. They were beautiful, they were great, and they were very important in the defense of the country. This was the first line, and they were carrying my picture and Rena's picture right there.
On the red carpet, Broadway.
There was 1 million people that saw that as it went up Broadway or Fifth Avenue or something.
So this is the first year?
No, this was 2010.
Yeah.
They do this every year. New York City has a Veterans Day parade every year. And 2010, they carried all these pictures of all the GIs and everything, and the only one that they had of a man and wife right there, Marv and Rena Modell, it says.
So
That was the
New York
first-
City really makes it a big deal for veterans.
Yeah, that's the biggest. Over 1 million people were there watching it on Fifth Avenue.
Their own behalf. to give poor people insulation in their homes for free. And I was the top producer. And they put a woman on the attaché case. See the woman, they were so...
I have been in the home of Marv, Modell, and his beautiful wife. And we want to thank him for his service and his opportunity to share his life with the next generation. And we hope that you'll look for more veterans and go and hug a veteran today. Have a good day.
February of 43.
That is a picture of you and your
And Rena.
in arena. Was this an engagement picture or a wedding
No, this
picture?
is when we met at the USO.
Oh, okay.
Way before engagements and weddings. Mercury News and the League of Friends of the Santa Clara County Commission. She was the 1981 Woman of Achievement volunteer for the whole Coast Guard here.
Warren, do you know what? As an art student at all the schools I ever went to, this was one of my finals. And the on behalf. To give poor people insulation in their homes for free. And I was the top producer. And they put a woman on the attaché case. See the woman, they were so...
I have a very special message tonight for everybody here from a very special person. So let me start my little story. My name is Marv Modell. I was a kid of 20 when I enlisted in the United States Coast Guard, and I served during 1942, 43, 44, and 45. Following boot camp and some port security duty, I joined the vital and heroic men and spars in Coast Guard intelligence until I was finally discharged in December of 45. Earlier this year, about 6 months ago, I was fortunate to make the acquaintance with the Coast Guard's highest ranking officer, 4-star Admiral, and the Coast Guard's highly regarded current Commandant, Robert J. Papp Jr. He calls me his shipmate, and we're friends. 2 weeks ago from this evening, I contacted the Admiral. I described the coming events of today's activities here on August 4th in San Jose, and I suggested that the Admiral might wish to send his personal greetings and feelings to the folks in Silicon Valley. He immediately agreed to do so. This may be a first. I was a Seaman first class, and he's a 4-star Admiral. And he followed my suggestion. And so, let me close this little presentation by telling you and relating the exact sentiments and words to everybody present directly from the Commandant of the United States Coast Guard. And I quote, "Shipmates, today we celebrate the Coast Guard's 222nd birthday. I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for commemorating the sacrifices and dedicated service of all of our veterans. I want to particularly thank those World War II veterans who are joining in today's celebration. You truly are the greatest generation. I salute your efforts to keep the spirit of 45 alive. and semper paratus, always ready. Close quote. Thank you.